Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Goodwin. I'm a trustee of the Historical Society of the New York Courts and a lawyer in New York City. Today is August 7th, 2020. Today, we're here as part of the Society's recording of the bar's response to the pandemic project, something which may have a catchier name by the time we're done with it. The pandemic in question is, of course, COVID-19, which has changed so many aspects of all of our daily lives, hopefully for the short term, and the practice of law is no exception. Through this project, the Society aims to record history as it happens, both to preserve this moment and, we hope, to learn from it. Joining us today is Rob Rosborough, the fourth, partner of Whiteman, Osterman, and Hanna LLP in Albany, New York, and steward of the NYS Appeals Twitter account and blog. Mr. Rosborough, thank you so much for joining us. I gave a bit of a sketch there, but let's start off with a little bit more of a fulsome background. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your firm, and your practice area and areas of specialty?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm excited to participate in this really great project you're doing. I started my career at the New York Court of Appeals, where I clerked for about 2 years before I joined Whiteman, Osterman, and Hanna as a litigation associate. I've been there for the last 10 years. I'm now a partner in their litigation and appeals group, and I focus probably about half of my time on appellate litigation and half of my time on land use and zoning matters and religious land use litigation. So, I've been doing that for a long time, with now more of a heavy focus towards the appeals. And like you said, I run the New York Appeals blog that I started about 3 years ago.
So you're up in Albany, and I know that a lot of or in the Albany area, I should say, and I know that we have a lot of folks who are watching this who are probably very New York City centric. How are things up in Albany right now? Are people going into the office, or is it still mostly socially distanced where you are?
Mostly socially distanced so far. I mean, our office has been technically open since, I believe, June, but most of our attorneys are still practicing remotely. I've been in the office once since March. It's been working out really well to be practicing remotely from home. So as long as the pandemic continues, I think we'll try to maintain those kinds of practices where we can serve our clients and do everything we would do in an office, but from my dining room table right here.
So tell me a little bit about that. How has your particular practice area been affected by COVID-19, and what kind of steps did you guys take in order to make sure that working from home was a possibility?
Sure. We've had remote work technology implemented at our firm ever since I started. So we have a Citrix client that lets us access all of our files as if I was sitting at my desk. I wouldn't have the traditional things like your big copier or pads and papers and those kind of things, but we made it work through the remote technology that we have. Now, when everything shut down in March, in the New York courts closed except for essential matters, civil litigation pretty much shut down for a number of weeks. So while we didn't have court filings, we still had a lot of, things that were in the hopper ready to be filed that we were still working on for clients. And clients had new issues too come up as a result of COVID. I had at least one client where we were dealing with health and safety issues that arose after, interpreting some of the governor's executive orders. And we had to deal with that on a very quick basis. So, it brought up new issues while also still, we had all the work we had before, but now we had to do it in slightly a different way.
So it sounds like from what you're saying, you had the way and the nature of your practice is you had a lot of different things in a lot of different stages. So the initial stages of the pandemic, you weren't able to file, but otherwise things were mostly moving along.
That's right.
For the cases that you kind of already had in the hopper, were you able to make appearances, file things with the court? Was there an ability to move those cases forward if they had already been initiated?
So in the beginning, it was tough. We had a lot of court conferences get adjourned while, the judiciary was focusing very heavily on the essential matters that were coming up. But as it started to progress and we moved back into moving civil litigation, we've had telephonic appearances, we've had virtual appearances, either in court conferences or, for example, just earlier this week, I presented an order to show cause for a temporary restraining order via the Skype platform that the courts use. And it seemed to have worked out very well, where our cases have now continued to move just like they would before. And the only difference is we're not setting foot in the courtroom, we're doing everything remotely.
What's client contact been like for you and your firm during the pandemic?
well, a lot more clients have my cell phone than did before, but it's been about the same. You know, when clients come up with issues, they'll call our office. Our office forwards to our cell at home, or my clients have my cell directly, where we are in constant contact. You know, for anything that would come up. And that's, you know, we've even had clients who prefer, you know, a face-to-face Zoom meeting, sort of like this, and we've done that too, and been very, it's been very useful to be able to still have that personal contact of seeing people face-to-face while, you know, maintaining the social distancing that these times unfortunately require.
Actually, I'd like to double back for a second. You mentioned you did an appearance for a TRO via Skype. Would you mind telling us a little bit about what that experience is like, how it compared with a traditional in-court appearance? Was there anything that was odd, interesting, better, worse that you really feel like stood out?
Sure. I mean, I think that it worked pretty much like it would have on a normal basis, except for we weren't standing in the courtroom in front of the judge. So you had all the attorneys, plus the judge's clerk, and the court reporter all on a Skype call. And it was the same type of argument you would see when you're trying to make out a temporary restraining order. I think that is going to be very useful going forward, especially when you are litigating cases that would require extensive travel, or the judge who might be sitting in Binghamton to come to Albany for a term. We can start doing things, you know, in the future on a remote basis and get the administration of justice even more efficient than it's been before. You know, I think, you know, besides calling the judge and asking, well, how would you prefer to see the papers first? Would you like us to email it to them, or do you want us to have a courier bring it over, or, you know, file it on the NYS system? Besides, you know, that a preliminary setting up of the order to show cause, everything else seemed to go the way that it would have if we were standing in court.
So, as I mentioned at the outset, you are the steward of the NYS Appeals Twitter feed and blog. And I know, you know, you and I spoke before we started this, and you mentioned that you hadn't actually done any appeals appearances during this time, that you had sat in a few. What's your sense about how the appellate process has been working statewide?
It seems to be going pretty well. You know, you have, especially in March and April, you've had a lot of cases that were either submitted on the papers that would have ordinarily had argument, or been scheduled for Skype calls that were proceeding in, I believe, May and June. And, you know, watching some of those, it seemed like the courts were getting very used to, you know, doing arguments by Zoom or by Skype in these particular instances. And it seems to have gone very well. Now, there's always a little bit of a lag when you have a hard time interpreting body language of the judges, or seeing where the next question is coming from in an oral argument type situation. But besides, you know, the interruptions that you normally see in a virtual type appearance, it seemed to go very well. And I think that the courts have really adjusted very quickly to doing things on a different basis to make sure their cases keep moving. It's been great to see how flexible the courts have been in making these, still disposing of all the same cases that they would before without getting such a huge backlog.
And you really, you know, I'm an appellate practitioner in New York City, and you really did see the courts ramp up very quickly. I know early on, all of our, you know, immediately after shutdown arguments, you had judges appearing at their kitchen tables. But at this point, it's a very professional approach. You have a lot of virtual backdrops. You have a lot of folks who are actually appearing from their offices. So it's really changed even from the first few weeks of how lockdown happened.
Right.
Actually, on that topic, so as of yesterday, I'm not sure if you're aware, the Second Department actually began listing cases for its September sitting.
I saw that.
Actually offering the opportunity of appearing in person. Do you think that kind of hybrid approach is a good thing moving forward?
I think so. You know, I think ultimately the appellate courts especially are probably going to want to go back to all in person. But until, you know, we have some certainty about the pandemic and, you know, whether it's safe to do so, I think giving practitioners the option and the courts the option to schedule arguments, you know, via Skype, or I think the Second Department chose Microsoft Teams, just a different platform to do the same thing. is a really great option. You know, it gives practitioners like me the option, if I don't want to take a 5:55 train down to New York to Brooklyn to head into the beautiful second department and argue a case, then maybe I'll sit here in my kitchen table and make the same arguments. But you know, I personally, I always prefer to be in a courtroom, you know, making an oral argument to an appellate panel. It's such a fantastic experience that's hard to replicate when I'm sitting here.
And it does make me feel a little bit silly for worrying about my 8:30 train down to Brooklyn. You face far more challenges in your particular commute. So on that topic then, you've been talking a little bit about how, you know, your firm was very well prepared for this, how your particular practice area was very well prepared for this, to the extent that any of us could have been prepared for the huge shift we've all seen. But what do you most miss outside of the magic, I guess, of the in-person appearance, from being able to come to court, be around other attorneys? What do you most miss from getting back to normal?
Yeah, it is really being around my colleagues. You know, we have a great litigation department where we're bounce ideas off of each other and really work well as a team on a lot of our cases. And I do miss that. You know, that's sort of an experience that's really hard to replicate when we're all in different places, even on a Zoom call. It's a much different experience than it would otherwise be for, you know, face-to-face in the office.
So if you were then able to say, here's what I would like to, you know, here's what we've learned, here's what should become sort of a permanent aspect of New York practice, versus here's what we did that didn't work, what would you kind of sort into those two categories? What do you think has been most successful? What has been least successful in this period of adjusting to COVID-19?
It's a hard question because there are so many things that change so quickly that, you know, it's difficult to assess, you know, what's been going well and what hasn't been going well without some perspective to look back on it. But, you know, I think that having the option to present something of an emergency nature to a court in a virtual experience where you don't have a regularly scheduled oral argument that you can plan weeks in advance to clear your schedule for. But if something comes up, you know, 5 o'clock the night before and you need some sort of relief from a court the next morning to ensure that your client or something is justice is done, you know, these virtual type arguments would be really helpful, and virtual presentations to a court are very helpful in those kind of situations. Because then you still have the opportunity to ensure that you're doing quality work on the papers as quickly as you can without having to, you know, for me, example, if I have an appearance in Buffalo or in New York City, then I have to get up really early and it cuts off all the other time that I would have to work on papers to travel down and be doing things on the way to court. So I think that is certainly very helpful. The way that things have changed different. Now, on the bad side, what I really like about working from home, I like being around my kids more. I think
I heard them a little bit in the background earlier.
Yeah, they're watching Star Wars over on the back. So it's been really great to be home and, you know, I've had my daughter join conference calls where she's sitting in my lap and I'm on the phone with clients, and, you know, she speaks up and sings Wheels to the Bus to herself every once in a while, and I get some client comments about it. But it's been really great to see, you know, everyday things that I would otherwise miss if I'd be in an office all day. So, you know, it's a little bit of both. You know, there's some really great aspects to working from home and some aspects that you really miss about being in an office.
Has your daughter been doing any questioning during depositions?
I'm trying to get her there. You know, I make sure that she knows no leading questions, but she'll get there eventually.
Yeah, it's a training process. A lot of people take a while to get there.
That's right.
So if you had to dispense advice to other lawyers about practicing before either the state or federal courts during this kind of time of adversity, what would be the advice you would give to them?
I think it's really just be flexible, because you really, to do our jobs well, we have to adapt to changing circumstances almost immediately. And that was true in March, just as it's true now. We just have a little bit more experience now than we did back in March when we had to, you know, go entirely electronic almost overnight. So if you're flexible with how you're dealing with issues for your clients or dealing with requests from the court, it makes the practice, so much more enjoyable and, getting things done in a very efficient way.
Do you think the bar has largely risen to the occasion during this time?
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. I think that, we've all, there's all sacrifices that we've had to make, to make sure that everyone can remain safe while still, pursuing the practice of law. But I think the bar has really risen to the challenge and done a great job in ensuring that justice is still done and cases still move while we're, suffering, unfortunately, these really, trying times.
Mr. Rosborough, before we bring this to a close, anything we didn't hit that you think is important to mention?
No, I think you covered it all. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Rosborough, for joining us. Again, this is the Historical Society of the New York Courts recording the bar's response to the pandemic project. If you'd like to learn more about this project or about the Historical Society in general, I ask you to please go to our website at history.nycourts.gov. Again, that's history.nycourts.gov. Mr. Rosborough, thank you so much for joining us today. It was really an honor.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.